Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Thursday, January the 8th. And welcome to our commentary. I've got a post over at the American Thinker today talking about Governor Walz and just the total collapse of Governor Walz as a political figure. I mean, he'll probably serve out his term. I'm guessing that's what's going to happen, although I wouldn't be surprised if he has to resign because this fraudulent situation in Minnesota is really going to be tough on him. But I don't know. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he'll survive his term. But his whole political future has been devastated. And the article that I write has a little bit to do with how in the world he was selected in the first place. What did they see in him, and who interviewed this guy? In the business world, when you hire somebody and he turns out to be a flop, a lot of people say, well, who investigated this guy? Who interviewed this guy? And I think you have to ask yourself the same question. I don't think he was the number one choice. I think they were hoping that Governor Shapiro would be the number one choice. I think he would have been more helpful to Vice President Harris, but it didn't turn out that way. They went with Governor Walz, but he didn't do anything for the ticket. He was supposed to connect with men. He didn't do that. And then, he was supposed to create more interest in the Midwest. Well, he really didn't do that, because when Trump selected Vance and people saw these two men on that debate together, clearly Vance was a much stronger candidate. So, people look back at it now and say, why was this man even considered for vice president? He didn't do anything for the ticket. Well, he hasn't been doing much for Minnesota either. And here recently, with this terrible shooting up there, the way he's handled this has just been completely crazy. I mean, completely crazy. I mean, the way this whole shooting has been handled, not just by some of the politicians in Minnesota, but frankly, by some of the people in the media, has also been extremely, extremely bad. I mean, you've accused this ICE agent of basically killing an innocent woman. Well, nobody wants to see anybody get killed. I regret that this woman was killed. It was a horrible thing. I believe she's the mother of a boy or something. So you don't want to see that happen. But to somehow portray this woman as an innocent bystander is not true. I mean, she was interfering with the work of ICE. When she was told to get out of the car, she didn't. And then there it is. There's the video, all different angles of it, when she accelerated the car. I don't know if she was trying to kill the agent. I have no way of knowing that. But if you're the agent on the other side and there's somebody accelerating a car toward you, you have every reasonable expectation that you're going to get hit by a car, and you have to defend yourself. So the whole thing is absolutely horrible. Nobody wins here. You have as I say, you have a mother who was killed, mother of I believe, a 7 or 8 year old child. And that's a horrible thing. That's a horrible thing. Nobody wants to celebrate that. But I believe the real culprit in this whole exercise is people like Governor Walz and the mayor of Minneapolis, who, instead of cooperating with ICE and working with ICE, they've done the exact opposite. I remember being on television here recently on one of the Spanish channels, contrasting the way, for example, that Texas works with ICE and the way that they do it up in Minneapolis. In Texas, because of the governor, Florida, the same thing. Most of the Republican states are the same way. What you have is a situation where the governor says you're going to have to work with ICE, or we work with ICE. So when ICE has a local operation, as happened here in the Dallas area about a month or so ago, when they had a major operation, they work with the local police, they work with the state police. And so you have a bunch of agencies, state and federal and local, that come together, and that makes the work of ICE a lot better, a lot easier, to say the least, because they're not going by themselves as they have to do in Minneapolis or in LA or other places. So I think the real culprit of this shooting was not the ICE agent. And I even feel sorry for the woman, because I think they put these crazy ideas in their heads that there's somehow that ICE is Gestapo and all that kind of stuff. I think the real culprit in this whole situation are politicians like Governor Walz, and the mayor of Minneapolis. So, Governor Walz has been a total failure. That's all I can say as a governor. As I mentioned a minute ago, I don't know if he's going to survive his term. I guess he's got a couple of years left. I don't know if he's going to survive his term, but he probably will. I'm going to bet that he does. But I wouldn't be surprised if he has to resign in disgrace, because this scandal that is blowing up in Minnesota is not nice, and he's right in the middle of it. And we're talking here about a lot of money, to say the least. So what a tragedy up in Minnesota, the shooting, and what a terrible governor and mayor they have up in Minnesota and Minneapolis, respectively. Well, I have a post coming out tomorrow talking about relocations and how more and more Americans are relocating from blue states to red states. And the consequence of this is a lot more than just people changing address. The consequence of this will be seen in the 2030 census, where Texas, for example, is supposed to pick up 4 districts. Florida, I think it's going to pick up also 4 districts. So now all of a sudden, Texas is getting up there in the high 40s when it comes to electoral votes, and Minnesota or Florida is getting up there to the mid 30s. So these 2 states will soon be the 2 most important electoral college states, and California will lose 4. So why is this happening? Because more and more people are leaving blue states and moving to red states, and they're moving for one simple reason, and that is quality of life. Not just the cost of living, but I think generally the quality of life. That's what they tell me when I talk to them down here in Texas as to why you chose to leave your state. And as I mentioned in my article, it's not really something to brag about, because what you want to see is 50 states that are giving the American people a real opportunity at the American dream. You don't want to have some states that are doing well and some states that are failing. Now, you're always going to have in a 50-state union, you're going to have some states that are doing better sometime than others. I mean, it happens. It's happened before. But when you see this trend that the blue states are the ones losing population and the red states are the one gaining population, that's not something, honestly, that helps the country, because you want all states to be doing well. And that's one of the things that I mentioned in my article. But there's no question. I mean, the 2032 election, the next time, not 2028, it won't apply to that one. 2028 will be under the current census. But in 2032, when you have another presidential election and potentially a House election as well, and Senate and so on, you're going to have a lot more Republican votes. I mean, when you take Texas and you take Florida and some of the other more reliable Republican states, you're going to start putting together a really good lock, if you will, at the Electoral College that the Republican candidate is going to have. And you're going to put the Democrats in a situation where they're going to have to win red states or compete in red states if they want to be competitive at all in the presidential election, or certainly for the House, because they are going to have less blue districts in 2032 than they have right now. So check out the article. It'll be out tomorrow morning, Friday, over at the American Thinker. Well, today, January the 8th, we remember Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was born on this day in Tupelo, Mississippi, or Tupelo, Mississippi. I think that's how you pronounce it, Tupelo, Mississippi. And he was born. Elvis had a twin when they were born. I think there were two of them, and obviously one passed away. And this is one of the most amazing stories of all time, Elvis Presley. I mean, here's a guy who, out of nowhere, becomes the king of rock and roll, and out of nowhere becomes probably the most important entertainer, certainly in the 1950s, the 1960s, and into the 1970s. And his career had so many different episodes. You had the young rocker, and then the movies, and then he ended his career doing all those shows in Vegas. But I mean, just an absolutely fascinating career. I happen to like his music a lot. And I read something the other day that his records are still selling. I shouldn't say records anymore, because they probably don't buy records anymore. But I mean, his downloads, I guess, or whatever people buy these days, are still selling at record numbers. So, I mean, the Elvis estate keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more people continue to like Elvis. which is completely reasonable because the guy was an amazing artist, an amazing performer. And as far as I'm concerned, the greatest American performer of the 20th century. So Elvis Presley, born on this day in 1935, as you know, he passed away in August of 1977. I remember that quite well. I remember getting the news that Elvis Presley had passed away, and it was quite a shock. Quite a shock. He was only 42 years old, but the man sure had an impact on our lives. If you just think about that, from let's say roughly the time that he was 20 to the time that he was 42, for about a 20 or so number of years, this man was an entertainer like no other. And I guess I do have one regret, that I never got to see him in concert. I never got to see him live. I wish I had seen one of those Vegas concerts. I've seen the movies, and I've heard I've heard the audio, but I never got to see him. And he was apparently an amazing entertainer, from what I can see in those videos of his concerts. The one from Hawaii that he did, and then of course several of the Vegas concerts that were recorded and made available later by video. So Elvis Presley, 1935, 1977, the king of rock and roll, as they call him. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.